All right, let's talk about something that's so often misunderstood. It's called auditory processing disorder, or APD. This is a condition that's pretty much invisible, and it gets to the very heart of the difference between just hearing a sound and actually listening to it. So let me start with a question. Have you ever gone for a hearing test and they tell you, yep, your hearing is perfect, but then you walk out into the real world and you just can't seem to follow a conversation, especially if there's any background noise? It's this incredibly frustrating feeling, and it's right at the core of what APD is all about. If this list right here is ringing a few bells, then you're definitely in the right place. Maybe you're always the person saying, what? Or you just dread going to loud restaurants. And that feeling of being totally wiped out after a long class or meeting, that's not just you being tired. It's a real thing called listening fatigue. And it's a classic sign your brain is working way, way harder than it should have to, just to keep up. So what is actually going on here? Well, this is the most important takeaway. This is not an ear problem. It's a brain problem. It's all about what happens to the sound after it gets past your eardrums. It's a neurological thing. Okay, so here's the official definition. APD is when there's a breakdown in how your brain, your central nervous system, analyzes and makes sense of what you hear. Your ears might be working perfectly, but the brain just struggles to interpret the information it's being fed. You can think of it like a processing bottleneck. I love this analogy because it just makes everything click. Think of your ears as these amazing, high-end microphones. They pick up every single sound wave flawlessly. But your brain is the sound engineer sitting at the mixing board. And with APD, that sound engineer is just having a really bad day. They can't filter out the background chatter, they can't focus on the main speaker, and they can't mix it all together into something clear. The sound gets in just fine, but it gets all scrabbled on its way to your consciousness. And this is where it gets a little more complex, because APD doesn't just exist on its own. A lot of its symptoms can look an awful lot like other conditions you've probably heard of, like ADHD or autism. And that, understandably, causes a ton of confusion. So let's try to untangle that. This table does a great job of breaking it down. So take ADHD. Someone with APD who misses an instruction might look like they're not paying attention. But the key difference is why. With APD, the instruction might not have been processed correctly in the first place. With ADHD, they might have heard it, but their attention drifted before they could act on it. Or look at autism. That feeling of sensory overwhelm from sound can look similar, but APD is specifically about how the sound gets encoded. And for dyslexia, both can involve a struggle with the sounds of language, but APD is that foundational auditory issue. And what's really, really important to know is that these things can, and very often do, exist at the same time. Okay, this next number, it's just incredible. A huge study back in 2000 discovered that by measuring a newborn baby's brain response to speech sounds, they could predict with 81% accuracy who was going to have trouble learning to read 8 years later. Let that sink in. It tells us that the neurological wiring for reading is tied to how we process sound right from the moment we're born. And of course, that impact carries right on into school. This quote from 2018 is so powerful. Now, a dichotic listening task is basically testing your brain's ability to handle different sounds coming into both ears at once, a skill you absolutely need in a noisy classroom. This study found that nearly half of the kids struggling the most in class had major problems with this exact skill. It's a direct line from poor auditory processing to struggling in school. Now, I know all of this might sound a bit discouraging, but hang on, because this is where the whole story takes a really hopeful turn. See, the brain isn't set in stone. It can change, it can adapt, it can be trained. We're talking about actually rewiring the brain. The magic word here is neuroplasticity. It's the brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself, to form new connections. And auditory training is designed to tap right into that power. You can honestly think of it like physical therapy, but for the listening parts of your brain. You use targeted exercises to strengthen the exact skills that are weak. And the whole process makes a lot of sense. First, you have to pinpoint the problem. An audiologist uses special tests to figure out exactly what's going on. Is it filtering out noise? Is it processing sounds that happen really fast? Then you practice. This usually means specific listening exercises and therapies, often on a computer. And the whole point of all this practice is to drive real physical change, to strengthen those auditory pathways in the brain. And what does that change actually look like in the real world? Well, it means improving the very skills you need to read. It means you can finally understand what someone's saying in a busy cafe. It means you don't feel completely drained at the end of every single day. The training directly tackles all those struggles we talked about at the very beginning. So, all of this leads to a very practical question, right? When should you, or maybe someone you care about, actually go get checked out for APD? Let's go through a quick checklist to help figure out when it's time to ask for a referral. For kids, these are the big red flags. And notice the key phrases here: a speech delay despite having normal hearing, or reading help that just doesn't seem to be working. If a child already has a diagnosis, like ADHD or autism, but they're still really struggling with listening, even after therapy, it's a huge sign that there might be an auditory piece of the puzzle that everyone's been missing. And for adults, the signs can be a little different. A huge one is getting expensive, perfectly fitted hearing aids and still not being able to understand people. That tells you the problem isn't volume, it's processing. And look at the modern challenges too, like having a really hard time on Zoom calls or in group chats where the audio isn't perfect, or maybe new listening problems that pop up after a concussion or a stroke. All of these are really good reasons to get an APD assessment. You know, for so long, we've thought of hearing as this fixed thing that's all about our ears. But the science behind APD and neuroplasticity just turns that whole idea on its head. It shows us that listening is a skill. And like any skill, it can be trained, it can be improved. And that just leaves you with a final thought. If that's true, what is the real potential of our ability to hear and connect with the world around us?